My name is Rick Baum, and I teach part-time political science here. And what I thought I would do is I'd go give you an overview of the narrative of the crisis at City College and what's the history behind it. So, and then Bob would talk more about the issue of privatization. And I should say my own background, so I'm a part-time teacher here. I'm not a union officer, I've never have been. I've gone to a lot of the union meetings. And so I'm talking about the union from an outside position. A lot of what I'm trying to say is things about how I see that our union could be more powerful, because I think that's part of the problem that we face here. And I'll talk more about that when I have the time to do so. So the last 2 or 3 years at City College, this is kind of what's happened in terms of the highlight of the issues. First of all, during the recession, there was huge cuts in the funding of the college. The number usually thrown out is that we were cut about $50 million over a 3-year period, which was hurt the college a lot. The response of the administration, as I understood it, was they were going to do a few things with regards to the crisis. I don't think they thought it would last that long, that our funding would be restored much sooner. Their response was that they did not want to cut programs and classes. They wanted to make sure that we still serve students with our comprehensive programs. That if money was to be saved, it would be saved by not replacing administrators who retired or quit or went elsewhere, and there'd be maintenance would be deferred. And they'd also dip into the school's reserves. I mean, that's why you have reserves, is so that if there's an emergency, you use the money to continue the functions of the college. Otherwise, it's just sitting in the bank. And in the case of City College, it's sitting, I believe, at Wells Fargo Bank. And you're talking about millions of dollars that they're making money off of because the money's being parked with them in the form of reserves. And I think it's something that people should be concerned about, because the Board of Trustees at this college decided to pull the funds out of Wells Fargo, and the special trustee who now runs the college decided, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to continue placing the money with Wells Fargo. In any case, so there was the cutting in the budget, and the response of the administration was to keep things open. State-wise, while this was happening, the state chancellor of community colleges came up with something called the Student Success Task Force. It was part of the reform agenda that's happening nationwide, maybe not exactly along the lines of what's being advocated, but that was to be the reform. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Student Success Task Force. What they recommended, and this is one of their key recommendations, is that community colleges must focus on students seeking degrees, certificates, and job training. In other words, they wanted to narrow the purpose of the community colleges to just those 3 things, get rid of things like lifelong learning, programs that don't provide someone with training to either transfer to a 4-year college or get a training in a field that is required by businesses. They also, other components of the Student Success Task Force is that students need to develop an education plan early, declare a major. They need to take a lot less time to get out of school. A lot of students, because they're working, they have family obligations. They may take 6 years to get a 2-year degree. The attitude of the Student Success Task Force is that they need to be here for 2 years and then get the hell out. And if they cannot afford to do so because they have to be working to support themselves, they should just take out loans, was the approach that they were taking. At least that's the attitude. And what happened with City College is that people from City College spoke out against the Student Success Task Force. This is around December of 2011. One of the big advocates for the Student Success Task Force was the Accrediting Commission, the ACCJC. So they were lobbying in favor of it, even though one might question if they have the right to lobby for this type of program when they're supposed to be accrediting colleges throughout the state. And so what we found is then 6 months later, City College, for the first time in its history, is sanctioned by the ACCJC. The narrative of the city attorney, who has filed a lawsuit that's going to be heard in a couple of weeks, again, he filed a lawsuit against the ACCJC, is that what happened to City College was revenge on the part of the ACCJC, and you could say the state chancellor, that we're going to stick it to them for speaking out against the Student Success Task Force. Whether that's actually accurate or not, I think it's something to always be kept in the back of your mind. And why was City College sanctioned? So, what were among some of the reasons? This doesn't cover it all, but they said among the reasons is that we had too few administrators. Remember, I was just saying how the chancellor was saying to keep programs open for students, that's what we're here for, that if an administrator leaves, we aren't going to fill that position to save money so that we can continue our programs and classes. A second thing that they went after the college for is they didn't like the way decisions were made. Essentially what that boiled down to is that there's too much democracy at City College, and that meant things would take time for a decision to be made. I mean, their preference would be you have a top-down structure. You have the chancellor make a decision, and everyone just follows through on the decision made by the chancellor. A third thing was that the college had budget problems, that they were running deficits. Now that's actually unclear. There's been other people who said, we always had an ending balance, that there always had to be a yearly report to the state chancellor, and never anything was said that our finances were having a problem. I can't argue that there weren't budget problems of the sort that would lead the school to be sanctioned, but I just know that some people would make that as a contention. One of the things to keep in mind about accreditation, I think everybody at the college favors accreditation, that it's always good to have outsiders come in and make suggestions, is what does the U.S. Department of Education see as the purpose of accreditation? And they say the following: the goal of accreditation is to ensure that education provided by institutions of higher education meets acceptable levels of quality. Keep in mind, acceptable levels of quality. What did the ACCJC say in its report about the quality of education at City College? When they put us on show cause, they said, the team concluded that the instructional programs in credit and non-credit programs provide high quality instruction. In other words, we provided a level of instruction above the standards of the U.S. Department of Education. And that's not me saying that. That's not some starry-eyed person who supports the college. That's the ACCJC saying this. And yet they turn around and say this school should be closed down because they place us on show cause, and that's the worst sanction you can have. Show cause means you have to prove why you should remain open. And so, you can put aside all the problems at the college. If it's doing providing high quality education, isn't that our purpose? And so it's fulfilling the main purpose of an education institution. Nevertheless, they decide to shut us down. And keep in mind that most of these problems were problems of the administration. It wasn't the faculty and the students who were causing the problems. Who's getting victimized though? The faculty and the students. The administration is doing quite fine. They're getting paid quite well. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's kind of what's going on. So in May of 2012, before we got the sanction, the current chancellor had to retire for health reasons, and so then they brought in a bunch of interim people. And I should say that many people were at first very shocked about this at the college. In fact, we now learn that one of the team members, one of the people who was evaluating the college, was shocked that we were put on show cause. So it wasn't just people at the college, it was even people who were participating in evaluating the college who felt that way. But when the sanctions came out, we started getting a lot of negative press from the Chronicle and elsewhere. Politicians were not stepping forward to help us. Most of them said, you got problems, fix them. And then the interim administration itself was bad-mouthing the college. I mean, a lot of the negative things being said about the college came from the press spokesperson for the college itself. So that was in July of 2012 that we got the sanction. July 2013, the ACCJC went further, said the college should be closed as of July 2014, even though supposedly we were making all this progress in complying with their requirements. Then the state chancellor, probably in collaboration with the accreditors, decided to dismiss the democratically elected board of trustees. They are a dysfunctional group, but again, they're elected by the voters in San Francisco. He decided that there should be a state takeover, and they had the college taken over, and he put in place a special trustee who he called a special trustee with extraordinary powers. So it wasn't just any ordinary run-of-the-mill special trustee. We're going to have one with extraordinary powers. So it almost sounds like, what?
Special trustees with ordinary powers?
No, extraordinary powers. Okay. It almost sounds like the guy who's been reading a lot of superhero comic books to come up with this title. Can you imagine if you're this person and you're at a conference with other, say, chancellors or presidents of colleges, and people go around the room, introduce themselves, and he's going to say, I'm the special trustee with extraordinary powers at City College. So I think, people would say, oh my God, they roll their eyes.
The acronym is good, though. We call them the STWEPs.
But he's been here
In October of 2012 to have veto power over the Board of Trustees. So that then he never had to exercise it because they were constantly complying with what he was demanding. So what has happened to City College has been severely downsized. There's been tremendous cuts. Enrollment, which at one time was over 100,000, is now at best in the mid 70,000s. Our faculty got a new contract in last year where our pay is 4% less than the pay scale of 2007. No cost of living increase. Keep in mind, 4% less than 2007 with no cost of living increases in it. Many, about 20% of the faculty have lost their jobs. Right after we approved the contract, the administration turned around and secretly provided the top administrators with about a 19% pay increase. And that got exposed, and there was a lot of bitterness around that. People at the college, a lot of people are very demoralized. One of the things that's happened with this accreditation crisis is that people are constantly having to do reports. So they're exhausted. They don't have time for other things. Just ongoing reports. I mean, the Accrediting Commission usually will give a college 2 years. The first time, they give us 8 months. So people are just hammered with all kinds of paperwork and things to do other than teach. So why is this occurring at City College in particular, although it's part of a nationwide trend? Keep in mind, City College is predominantly a working class college. Most of the students are working class or disadvantaged students of color. We're the biggest community college in the state. We're in the most liberal city, perhaps in the country, that's supposed to be pro-labor. If they can succeed at City College, everywhere else will be a cakewalk. So if they succeed with their agenda of disempowering the union or even breaking it and bring about their austerity and transformation, they're, presumably they aren't going to face the same kind of resistance elsewhere. So there's a lot that I've left out, but that kind of gives you a picture of things. And then, Bob?
Yeah,
your turn.
Thanks, Rick, for saying where we are. I really appreciate what George said earlier about, we need to look at the systemic root of all this. And so in my talk about privatization, I'll start very general and systemic. So what we know is over the past few decades, multinational corporations have run out of ways to expand markets and to rake in high profits. So they've pushed for policies that tear down all regulations and international trade laws that hinder their ability to make money. This has led to various free trade agreements between the U.S. and other countries, which have had devastating effects that we hear of, right? Including the immigration from Latin America that is being blamed on immigrants instead of the policies such as the free trade agreements, CAFTA and NAFTA, that did those, that created havoc in the economies of those countries. They've also pushed to take over public goods, resources, and services and sell them at a hefty profit. This has led to attempts to privatize water, as we've heard of in Bolivia, where people fought back. Public lands, parks, all these things are up for grabs now by the multinationals to make profit. And public education is, what I'm here specifically to focus on. That's a key example. Important examples of struggles by students, teachers, and communities against corporatization of public education have been waged in Chile, Quebec, the UK, Mexico, US, and in the US particularly, the Chicago teachers fought back, and they fought back at least, but what they've got is something we can talk about in discussion. But we know the struggle's a difficult one because we're standing up to the most powerful corporations, their CEOs and their lobby groups, and what it will take is a united national effort and a worldwide movement, really, to stop this whole what's called neoliberalism by a lot of the academics. So in the U.S., public education privatization has been sweeping the K through 12 schools for the past couple of decades, and I'm sure Jack's going to comment on some of that with respect to the Oakland schools. Public schools run by by elected boards have given way first to school vouchers that funneled public money to pay for students to go to private schools, then more recently to charter schools that are run privately in public facilities, often for corporate profit, or most of the time for corporate profit. So who's behind all of these reforms? Again, I think we know this, but I thought this was important to review. People like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Eli Broad Foundation, Broad, I guess you're supposed to say, they pronounce it in a funny way, but the Walton Family Foundation. All of these foundations and other major private foundations are funding groups like the KIPP schools, a for-profit school grouping, Teach for America, program of the government that puts, idealistic young people into schools because the narrative is to try to make it look like teachers are the problem. And if we bring in these new graduates out of college, they can show up these bad teachers that, that have tenure that we can't get rid of. And the Charter School Growth Fund is another organization that pushes the agenda. And what they do is, I just said it a minute ago, part of it is they say the problem is greedy, self-interested teachers and their unions that protect them and support them. And these corporations and their foundations portray themselves as benevolent philanthropists that have the best interests of children at heart. And they make, you've seen the movies even that they make as propaganda pieces, showing how communities taking over their schools, this is supposed to be really empowering, but what it's all about is busting unions and blaming the teachers. The American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, has played a major role in all of this. They craft model legislation favoring corporate reforms, and they host vacation-like retreats for senators and Congress people, and convince them to take these models of legislation and turn them into law. And it's been done in a lot of states for the K-12 system. Things like the Student Success Initiative and the Student Success Task Force that Rick talked about, that's part of the efforts of groups like ALEC. They push for science and technology almost to the exclusion of other subjects. This benefits high-tech corporations like Microsoft and Amazon, who envision future lucrative contracts where they can provide schools with educational technology that they claim is needed to improve the effectiveness and success of students in the classroom. Common Core, we know, is another top-down, one-size-fits-all curriculum reform that will standardize education and make billions for companies like Pearson Learning. And in this particular instance, the leadership of the top teachers unions, the NEA and the AFT, are right on board with the Common Core state standards and are not opposing them. In fact, they also are, we know they sit on the boards of charter school corporations as well. So our educational unions are not helping out in any way to stop this trend. These reforms are endorsed by both political parties, by the Obama administration, Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. So I don't think anyone in this room would think that the Democrats are not part of the problem, but they are. And we need to make sure that gets out to the general public that it's not just the Republicans, it's the Democrats that are pushing this down basically into the communities and all the communities. So what I want to focus more on is higher education. So that's on the drawing board of the reformers. And so the things that ACCJC is doing at City College is part of that agenda. One of the major groups pushing for corporate reform at the higher ed level is the Lumina Foundation. And they were formed from student loan money when a group called the USA Group, a big student loan corporation, sold $1 billion worth of student loan debt to Sallie Mae, the Student Loan Marketing Association. And so from that profit, they created the Lumina Foundation that would go out and advocate for the kind of reform that would support them getting more and more money from student loans and benefiting other corporations in the ways that I just outlined above. They're pushing for 60% of U.S. residents to earn college degrees by 2025. That'll be quite lucrative for those lenders, right? If all of those people have to borrow money to go to school. They claim they are aiming to improve the success. So one of the ways they sell themselves, they say, you know, we need more success for our students, and they especially say we're going to help the success of poor students and students of color. But in fact, just the opposite is true. This is being pushed on us in higher ed, like these things like the Student Success Initiative, they say will help communities of color, the poorest. Well, in fact, as you limit education, those groups are going to be the first ones to be limited. And you know, part of the attack at City College is on the departments that are called the diversity collaborative departments, that includes all the ethnic studies departments like African American, Latin American studies. Those are under threat. So not only will it affect these students adversely through access, but also through getting rid of departments and merging programs in ethnic studies areas and women's studies and LGBT studies and areas like that. And what's interesting about that is it's similar to what was done in pushing charter schools on the communities. Charter schools were put out to the Black communities, the Latin American communities, as the answer to schools that were underfunded. And you know, they convinced some of the misleaders in those communities to go for those charter schools, and now we have the situation we do. The Lumina Foundation funds ALEC to help promote the legislation, like the Student Success Initiative that Rick talked about. So I think I have some more notes on that, but Rick pretty much covered what the Student Success Initiative has done. And then Lumina Foundation has funded the ACCJC, our accrediting agency, to do exactly what we've seen at City College, to carry out these kinds of reforms and push things in the direction that will really benefit corporations. And I would say part of the privatization at City College is if they cut our programs and they focus more on the sciences and math. I'm a chemistry instructor, by the way, but you know, I think we need liberal education in all the fields. So even though my area is less likely to be hurt, in the long run it will be hurt because we'll be just made to prepare people for jobs, for tech jobs, without much critical thinking. And you know, critical thinking is part of every field, and if they're going to take critical thinking out by limiting people in fields like the humanities and social sciences, it's also going to affect our students' ability in the hard sciences, the physical sciences, and biological sciences as well. Just to say, one other thing before I go into some of the specifics of City College, the U.S. Department of Education and their role. Rick said what they say accreditation is supposed to be about. Well, the problem is they may say one thing, but the officials are connected to the charters and the for-profit colleges. Their careers span both the Department of Education that sets educational standards, and there's this revolving door between working for companies like the Educational Testing Service and being an analyst at the Department of Education, or a person who sets policy in the Department of Ed. I have a few examples. R.A. Duncan himself is a big proponent of charter schools, and we know what he did in the Chicago schools before he became the Department of Education director or secretary. One other example, I have a list of a few, but just to make it short, there's a guy named Arthur Rothkopf who oversees something called NASICI. NASICI is this group that regulates accrediting agencies. And he's on the board of the Educational Testing Service, which is the SAT and the GREs. Those are all part of the ETS. So it's this kind of corruption and these kinds of interests that are being interweaved. The government is permeated basically with people from the private sector who are going to help push this agenda, is my point. At City College, some of the what the privatizations has done here specifically. We see a lot of use, for example, of consultants for things like IT. The IT work was done in-house a lot in the past. Now there's millions, literally, if you look at the budget of City College, millions of dollars is allocated for IT consultants and consultants that do work formerly done by college staff. Our bookstore used to be, again, run by the college and a board, a private board, well, not a private board, a board that was part of the college. Now it is part of Follett, which is a big corporate operation of operator of college bookstores around the country. It even goes to little things. I mean, I look at my parking permit that I use to park here. Those were issued by a private company. The college used to do it itself. Now a private company has to collect information on us. So they have this database with all of our information and issue us a parking permit. It goes on to other things like the administration. What the ACCJC, our accrediting agency, has done is open the door to replacing a lot of our administration with people who are all on board with the corporate agenda. It started with the interim chancellors that we had after the previous chancellor, who was, as Rick said, was putting out more of a program of keeping the college serving the community. When he left, for health reasons, we foisted upon us was a woman named Pamela Fisher, she goes around the state training boards of trustees how to basically push the corporate agenda. I mean, she tells them things like, oh, you're not supposed to talk to students or staff in your colleges. If you do that, you're basically, it's supposedly like they're violating some principle of neutrality. I mean, in fact, they're supposed to be talking to those people. We had a woman named Thelma Scott Skillman after Pamela Fisher, who actually told the press in fall of 2012, she said something like, well, if I were a student, I don't know if I would go to City College because I wouldn't be sure it would be open at the end of this year. I might look at other options. And then she denied that she said this and said that she was misquoted. But there's basically, we've heard that there's a tape that has her saying it. So there's direct sabotage of the efforts to keep City College running. So not only do they want to put in this corporate agenda, but they'll sabotage and do anything they can to downsize the college. So although there is a court case right now, and basically that's put out as the major way that we're fighting back at the moment is the court case. The court case is not helping with the damage that we've already had done to us. Now we have Art Tyler as our chancellor, who's a graduate of the University of Phoenix. He has his doctorate in organizational management from the University of Phoenix. So that's the kind of person who's being put in here. In the past, people who were running the colleges were people who came up through academia. And knew what it was to teach, knew what it meant to provide education. Now we have people with degrees in management running us. So he's there. He spent 20 years in the U.S. Air Force, and in that capacity, he was specifically he was a special agent and anti-terrorism manager for the Air Force. So he did basically Homeland Security type work before coming to City College. So that tells you another thing. So they're putting in people that have MBAs or degrees like MBAs, as well as people who are good at stopping people's ability to fight back. And by the way, he was the special trustee of Compton College in the Los Angeles area when it lost its accreditation. So that shows you something about the competence that we can expect from him and where he really stands. We didn't have a president for years. We just had a chancellor that ran the whole college and all of its campuses. Art Tyler told us we needed to have a president, and Bob Agrella went along with this. So Bob Agrella is the special trustee with extraordinary powers. So we have a new president that was hired. What was it about? Last spring, was it, that we got her? I can't remember, but in the summer. Her name is Virginia Parras. She's got an MBA, and again, a business type person running the college, and she's about to get a doctorate in business administration from Walden University. And Walden University is one of those kind of schools where it's all done probably now online. It used to be done by correspondence. So, it's not your most reputable source of an MBA. first of all, problematic having an MBA, and then second of all, why is it someone from Walden University? So these are the kind of people that we have running the college now, and they have done a lot of the damage that Rick mentioned. The deans that were in place previously, many of them have been replaced by those who were not part of the previous Save CCSS. That's the group that we started to fight back, but they were not part of the previous city college culture from the past. So this has led to the cuts and the enrollment drops that Rick mentioned. Another way that privatization is happening is more and more of the burden of paying for the education is shifted from the state. So the state has funded the colleges less and less all over the state, and students have to, from their private funds, have to pay more, so that you can say that's an aspect of privatization as it affects the college. And another one is, as what we're really seeing now is the Student Success Initiative had this line about repeatability of courses. They don't want people to be able to repeat courses, and this has led in departments like art and physical education and other, even foreign language, a big drop in enrollment because, maybe one semester this particular art course deals on, Impressionism, the next semester maybe on Cubism. Well, if you've taken it once, you're not allowed to take it again, even though the content may vary. So what some of the busy work that Rick described is people have to now create several separate courses to take up what used to be one course. So that's a lot of the busy work that people have to do at the college too, besides trying to just teach and educate their students in a good way. So that's a lot of what we're seeing. It is happening, it's ongoing. We have been downsized already, and it's continuing. We have an administration who we can only expect more of this from. They're determined to continue on that path. And so even though we may win a court battle against the ACCJC, it will not bring back all the things that we've lost. And what we really need, as I said in the beginning, is we need a sustained movement that links us up with other schools that are undergoing this kind of threat around the state, for one thing, but around the country too, and eventually around the world, because as I said at the beginning, the privatization of education and higher education is seen everywhere in the industrialized world now. So, and even in the developing countries like Mexico. So it's a big battle, and by united efforts, that's the only way we can fight it back. And by making the consciousness, putting the consciousness out there that it is not just a school by school fight, but a big fight overall for colleges, but for all the public resources we have. So I'll stop there. A bill was passed in the Assembly to hold City College harmless for enrollment drop, meaning that even though our enrollment is down compared to last year, we continue with the same funding or close to the same funding as what we had last year, which means basically you should be able to run courses at below the 20 minimum student limit that our college puts on us. And they're not following that at all. They have canceled a lot of classes that had under 20 people. And so this is no way to build enrollment for the future. If we want to build enrollment back up, we should be offering all the courses we can, even though their enrollment is less than 20, to put that class on the book so that people will take it in subsequent semesters. So the administration has gone against the remedy that was provided to us in that regard. And the administration is canceling classes even before the semester begins and not giving them a chance to fill through the add drop period, which is the first 2 weeks of the semester. So we're seeing classes canceled way before they've had a chance to enroll enough people to be viable.
Again, a lot of our students have jobs. They have family obligations. So they have tight schedules. So they sign up for all their classes, and then right before school starts, they're told, well, sorry, but these classes are being canceled. So then they have to do all kinds of juggling. For some, that might mean, I can't go to this place because I can't arrange my schedule. That's part of the downsizing of the college. They want to discourage students from being here, as Bob said with the former chancellor and former interim chancellor and what she had to say. They consciously are doing things, either they're incredibly incompetent or they're purposefully sabotaging the place. I won't accuse them of either one.
What are they?
Can we let him finish his report and then we can open it?
Okay. So, well, I was going to talk now about the union. I think one thing that should always be kept in mind about what's happening with colleges is that I will often look at Department of Labor studies, and when they're projecting future job growth, and we do that, you'll see that most jobs they project in the future, people are not going to require a college degree. I mean, there's always this kind of this contradiction where on the one hand you tell everyone, go to school, get a degree, you'll make more money, but there aren't the jobs there if you take seriously the future job growth. And I think that's a lot of also what's going on, is that on the one hand, places like Lumen are telling they want more people to get degrees, but they know darn well once those people get degrees, there aren't going to be jobs for them, or there's going to be so many people seeking out these high-tech jobs or these jobs that require technical skills that's going to drive the cost of labor way down. And so that should be kept in mind about all the downsizing. So I'm going to talk about my union, which is AFT 2121, and I'm going to say a number of critical things about them, and I'm not doing so to sound cynical or negative. In the back of my, what's really driving all that I have to say is that I want my union to be a lot stronger, to be able to take on more effectively what is happening at the college, because they have a lot of resources and they have a lot of capability of doing so much more, and they've done, in my mind, and only in retrospect, a fairly dismal job of dealing with the crisis. We've lost about, in the last 5 years, we've lost about 20% of our faculty. That severely weakens the union, because that means a lot less dues are coming in. They've lost over 375 members. So they're being hurt by not responding, what I would say is more vigorously to the crisis. Well, I'll get into some of the specifics of how they've operated. But one of the reflections of how weak our union has been is the fact that our contract, where we got a 4% pay cut from 2007. Prior to that, the union put a lot of emphasis on getting more money for the college. So in November of 2012, during the election, a couple of propositions were passed to provide the college with more money, Prop A and Prop 30. The administration said, fine, we're going to have more money. Then they turned around and imposed unilaterally a 9% pay cut across the board on all faculty. They laid off all the part-time counselors. They also laid off other faculty members, and then they laid off more than 30 staff members. So here they get more money, and what do? They turn around and say, so what, we're still going to make these huge cuts unilaterally. My union issued a unfair labor practices complaint, but then in negotiations over our contract, they dropped it. So that never went anywhere. So they let them get away with this 9% pay cut. Whether or not they would have prevailed is another matter. Our union today says that a lot of their organizing is based on the Chicago model of grassroots organizing, but even here they've been very ineffective. After more than a year of their so-called grassroots organizing, we had an election in which they sent ballots out to all the members, and there are about 1,050 voting members who are eligible, and they could do so in the comfort of their home over a 2 to 3 week period. And out of the 1,050 roughly that were eligible, we have over 1,500 faculty members, but some don't belong to the union. Only 400 people voted in the election, which to me is kind of pathetic. And I have to be straightforward. I ran for the executive board and I got slaughtered. But the highest vote getter only got at most a third of those who are eligible to vote voting for them. So it's a problem. I think it's a sign of our weakness.
What do you attribute that to?
The lack of turnout?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let him finish.
Okay. One of the issues for us is, let me just, I'm getting lost a little bit. Part of the week, I want to go through why is this happening in this crisis and this attack on public institutions like education. And a lot of it has to do with the weakness of organized labor throughout the country. If organized labor was stronger, I don't think we would see these kinds of attacks happening to public institutions. And one of the things that's driven me to be so active in this is the importance of public education and making sure that we can maintain it. But organized labor's had a decline in members. So I've already said we've had a huge decline during this crisis at the school. Another part of the problem for organized labor that I think also afflicts my own union is a top-down organizing structure, which means the leaders make decisions for the members. The members are not involved in their decisions in terms of planning strategy or discussing what we should be doing. It's all left up to the leadership. This alienates a lot of members, not only here, but I would assume in labor unions throughout the country that, and we hear this all the time. I hear this from some of my students. Yeah, I pay dues for my union. I don't understand what for. I'm getting ripped off. They aren't doing anything for me. So it's that kind of attitude that is seriously weakening the labor movement. And while they're actually losing members, they're also not doing anything to address their kind of bureaucratic responses and bureaucratic actions. Another thing that goes on, at least in my union, I'm sure elsewhere. Now, I do want to say my union is relatively more democratic than most unions, but it still is quite deficient. But the leaders don't spend a lot of time informing their members about what's going on and letting us know what decisions they're making and why they're making them, because they also are not letting us be involved in the discussions and involved in planning their strategies and things like that unless you're an officer. I mean, a real good example of this happened just very recently. So this is the way that what my union does, and it's typical. They informed us after the fact that Randy Weingarten was in town and that they met with her. They didn't tell us ahead of time that they're going to be meeting with her, and do we have anything that we would like to ask, or would we like to participate in that? Then we find out, according to this, she was in San Francisco for 2 days. Yet she only spent 1 hour with my union leaders, even though we're facing this crisis, which I think has nationwide ramifications. They said that she stopped by and spent an hour with our executive board. She was very interested in understanding the complex accreditation struggle at City College. I mean, she doesn't know about it already? This has been going on for over 2 years. She's the head of the union, and they're going to inform her? Then they go on. She has a clear understanding of the implications of our struggle against the accreditors, not only for City College, but for California and the nation as well. And then we're told at this meeting, she made a commitment from the national AFT to do whatever was necessary to keep City College open. They don't tell us what commitment she made. They don't spell out the specifics. Is she going to throw in $1 million to make sure we aren't defeated? Or is she just going to give a lot of verbal, rhetorical support? Yeah. I mean, this is like typical. I mean, this is coming from the union newsletters telling us. And she's going to rein in the rogue ACCJC. She's going to use her efforts to do so. Then we find out, while she was here, then she, along with leaders of the CFT, the California part of the American Federation of Teachers, and AFT 2121 leadership met with Pelosi. Okay? And so they're meeting with one of the power brokers who's really been missing in action most of the time we've had this crisis until about last December, for the first time she actually said anything and spoke up, and then she kind of got lost again. Anyways, it was a productive meeting with Pelosi where Randy and others updated her on the latest shenanigans of the ACCJC. Well, Randy was just learning about the latest shenanigans of the ACCJC. So she meets with a limited group of the union leadership, not a diverse group, and then she's informing Pelosi. And anyways, they had a productive meeting. What made the meeting productive? They don't tell us. Did they go in there telling Pelosi, we want you to do X, Y, and Z? We don't know. We just know that they had a productive meeting. And we haven't heard anything about it since then. And at the meeting, we emphasized the devastating impact the ACCJC and administration policies have had on students, faculty, and staff. Well, come on. Doesn't Pelosi already know this? I mean, but this is typical. This is how we're communicated with, but we aren't communicated in a way that empowers us and gets us involved with things. Because I think a lot of us would have said, yeah, we want you to tell Weingarten this, we want her to be doing this, and we want you to tell these things to Pelosi. But that's the kind of like the top-down way that our union has been operating. I think it's very illustrative of a lot of what's been going on. The other thing, as Bob already has mentioned, is the reliance on the Democratic Party, from Obama to Brown, on down to local politicians. Many of these people are part of the problem. They're the ones imposing all these changes that are detrimental to teachers. They're the ones bad-mouthing teachers. I mean, it's Arnie Duncan who cheerleaded for the decision in Los Angeles to got tenure protection for K through 12 teachers. It wasn't some right-wing Republican. It was right there in the Obama administration. And And again, what their narrative is, teachers are to blame for our students not being properly educated. The unions are the problem, protecting tenure. They don't mention maybe things like poverty might be a problem, the lack of funding, because basically they've been cutting our funding and they expect us to do more with less resources. So of course, our students aren't getting well educated. I mean, if you go to school hungry, and I once substitute taught in Oakland, I'd have students show up who are hungry. How can you concentrate and study if you don't have food in your belly? So, that's not being addressed. We know that there's widespread starvation in this country or people not getting enough food to eat. So our union strategy with the Democrats is to get Democrats elected who basically at this point take for granted union support. They know the union's going to pour millions of dollars into their campaigns, and then they don't have to do anything for them. It's kind of like I often hear about the black community is bitter because the Democrats know darn well that blacks are going to vote 90% for them. So if they're going to vote for them, you don't have to deliver anything. It's the same thing with union support for the Democrats. The strategy is pass legislative reforms, rely on the courts to achieve justice. A lot of people at City College are banking a lot on this case that's being initiated by the city attorney of San Francisco. And if we win there, everything's going to be hunky-dory. Well, the best case scenario, and it's not even clear that that's going to happen, is if we win, the union will say, now we can get fair accreditation. Well, who's going to do it? Because they're going to rescind the show cause and start all over again. Well, who's going to institute that fair accreditation? The same people who put us on show cause. So there's no change. In fact, there's going to be a team coming in November to visit us, and the co-chair of it, I just found out, is the guy who's in charge of Santa Monica College. Santa Monica College is the college which is trying to institute a two-tier tuition system, where when classes are impacted and you can't get your class, well, cough up about $300 a unit and we'll make a class available for you. Students protested that, and how were they treated? They got tear gassed, and 2 were hospitalized. One of the people's tear gas wasn't a student, it turned out to be a baby. That's the guy who's now going to be in charge of visiting City College to decide if we're eligible for some new concoction that the ACCJC came up with, which is restoration status. I won't get into that, but it's just another bunch of malarkey. So what does my union do? They aren't relying on mass mobilizations and street actions. They're endorsing Jerry Brown. And one of the reasons they're endorsing Jerry Brown is they're claiming that state funding has been restored to education in California. So I decided, I'm going to look up some numbers. In 2007, 2008, does anyone remember who was the governor then? It was Arnold, okay? The state funds were $145 billion. K through 12 got $45 billion in 2007, 2008. In 2014, 2015, Jerry Brown's restored funding. The budget has $11 billion more dollars in it. The funding is now $45.46 billion. So it went from, under Arnold in 2007, from 45.42 to Jerry Brown 2014-15 to 45.46. So, and this doesn't take into account inflation and cost of living. So they're endorsing him for restoring funding. He hasn't restored funding. For higher education, the same thing. Actually, higher education under Schwarzenegger was close to $15 billion. Under Jerry Brown's new budget, it's $13 billion. So it's even less. Supposedly this is the Democratic alternative. Well, this is no alternative. And Brown did something sneaky too this last year. Well, and the union actually thanked him for doing so. They claimed that there is a crisis in the defined pension benefit program called CalSTARS. Jerry Brown's solution was the following. We're going to make sure that teachers contribute more money to CalSTARS for retirement. So their contribution in 2013-14 was 8% of the pay. By 2016-17, it's going up to 10.25%. So in other words, there's going to be a statewide cut in pay of 2.25%. Now with the districts, their funding is also going to go up. So they have to match what's given to CalSTARS. So in 2013-14 is 8.25%. By 2016-17 it's going to go up to over 12.5%. And by 2020-21, the plan is to go up to 19%. What that means is any new money schools are going to see are going to be turned around, put right back into CalSTARS, meaning that there's not going to be more money for educating students. And they claim there's a crisis. The crisis is because of the way the money's managed, the state starving it of funds, and frankly, I won't get into this, they don't like defined pension benefit plans because those guarantee you a certain amount of money. They'd rather have you put your money into a 401k plan and then you go with the market, and you either get screwed or you do well. Other things about my union. So let me give you some of the highlights. In the fall of 2012, the union took the approach that the school needed more money. That made complete sense. We were short of funds, and so they worked very hard on Prop 30 and Prop A. Also, this was in an atmosphere where everyone was shocked and intimidated by this accreditation crisis. And the narrative was that if you make a stink and come out criticizing the ACCJC, they're going to just shut you down. I mean, they were making these kinds of threats. So it's understandable that the union looked elsewhere for struggles and tried to raise more money. But they raised more money, as I already said. The administration turned around and imposed across the board 9% pay cut and laid off a bunch of people. What did the union do in response to this? Essentially nothing. Did they organize a militant picket line against the administration? Did they speak out vigorously? No. What happened is that Bob and I had started something that would eventually be called the Coalition, which is we wanted to work closely with the union but was outside the union. And it's a volunteer group, and we spontaneously came up with the idea of boycotting the chancellor's speech on our Flex Day. And we had about 300 people boycotting it. Apparently, the auditorium, normally completely full, was a third full. I understand, and this is secondary, so it's by rumor, is that our union leader was not very keen about this because one of the things that they have done is avoid confronting the administration. But because she saw the groundswell for it, she came and participated and spoke at this boycott of Flex Day of the Chancellor's speech. As I said, the union filed unfair labor practices against the administration for the 9% cut, but they dropped that later on. Our union has taken a very low-keyed approach. Just an example, and then they also take an approach where they don't have the members deciding what we should be doing. They don't have the members involved in making demands. So this is the kind of approach that they take. They had a rally that they organized in October of 2013 in front of Civic Center. And they can mobilize people. There were about 350 people, I'd guess. And they came up with a demand for this rally. And the demand was to call on Ed Lee, the mayor, to protect City College. Now, what do they mean by protect? I don't know. Ed Lee was someone who, along with the state chancellor, orchestrated the state takeover of the college, saying that we needed the special trustee with extraordinary powers to transform the school, to comply with the accreditors, get rid of this dysfunctional board of trustees. And what is the union doing? They're asking him to protect the college? I mean, what does that mean? But that's often been their approach. And so they have a rally devoid of a demand, and this is kind of their approach even in negotiations. Another thing about their approach is that they have narrowly focused on the accreditors. This is never discussed among members. You know, as I already said, at the start of the crisis, they didn't want to speak out against them. In fact, they were very quiet about speaking out against the ACCJC, even though their former president, Marty Hittleman, had written this devastating report showing their abuse of power since at least back to 2003, where they sanctioned more colleges in California far and away than is sanctioned by accrediting agencies throughout the rest of the country. So they've been doing this, what they've done to City College, for years now. And the union knew this because their former president had written about it, but they didn't speak out. And then one day, out of the blue, in March of 2013, they launched a legal complaint against the accreditors with the U.S. Department of Education. We did not know about this. And again, we pay for this because it's our lawyer, who's funded by our dues. That may have been a wise strategy. I don't know. Keeping it secret, but it's kept secret from the membership. And this is like, what should I say? There's the notion of shooting a warning shot across the bow. This is shooting a warning shot right into the bow itself and trying to sink the ship. And so they went from being mild and never speaking out against the ACCJC to launching this really major complaint against them. But it's also always narrowly focused, and their strategy is just focus on the ACCJC and everything will be good. I mean, this is illustrated when this lawyer came and addressed those of us in the coalition in the summer of 2013. He gave a talk about the complaint, what he's up to, and I don't want to sound like I'm complimenting myself, but I asked him the question. I said, you know, the ACCJC is a horrible organization, but our administration is also attacking us and destroying us. What are you going to do about that? And his response was, well, I wasn't hired by your local. I was hired by the California Federation of Teachers to go after the ACCJC, so that's not my job. And I think that's kind of been the approach of the union all along. You just have this narrow focus, and that will take care of things. I mean, in the negotiations, last year we had negotiations over a new contract. Again, there were no meetings to discuss our demands going into the contract, what should be our strategy. The mindset, I think, of those going into it was one that they had in the past. With the old administration, this is just my impression, I can't document this, there was the notion of collaborating, that we sit down together, we look at the budget numbers, especially when there were the cuts, and figure out how can we deal with this new budget that we have. And this sharing of information, as I said, the old chancellor said he didn't want to lay anyone off, and he wanted to keep the programs intact. And so the union would agree to a mild cut in pay, like 2 or 3%, so that everyone keeps their job and the programs remain in place, based on the notion that our funding is going to be restored because the recession isn't going to last that long. Well, they're dealing with another new can of worms. Now they're dealing with an administration that will hammer them and not give an inch. And they do that with the department chairs, they're doing that with our union, and they make outrageous demands. And our union would go into the negotiations, at least this would be my impression, Bob may have a different impression, that we can still collaborate. So instead of having demands, they respond to the outrageous demands of the administration. What were some of the outrageous demands they were making? They were saying that seniority protections for part-time teachers, and I have a better situation here than any other district I've taught in about 4 different districts, that they should be eliminated. They also wanted to have everyone take a 5% pay cut, but part-timers would take an additional 10% pay cut. I mean, this is the kind of demand that the administration was making. They even at one time had a demand that part-time instructors should fund the retirement programs for retirement medical benefits. The only ones who get retirement medical benefits are full-time instructors. Part-timers are not entitled to them. But the administration was demanding that we turn over part of our pay to fund this trust so that the pensions of full-timers can be covered. I mean, these things, fortunately, we all prevailed on. The rights of part-timers were kept in place. The problem is that while our rights were kept in place, we weren't guaranteed jobs. So it'd be like the union contract was good and it kept us in the same place, but it didn't guarantee us a job, which is of vital importance to people. It doesn't do much good to have benefits and rights if you don't have a job. And there's nothing, that's not been an issue. Let me say also, the full-timers have really taken it on the chin in this college. In the fall of 2013, they make, on average, compared to the rest of the state, $10,000 less. A few years ago, in 2005, they were $4,000 over the state average, according to the state chancellor's figures. By contrast, the administration, in fall of 2013, the education administrators were making $148,000 a year. The statewide average was $134,000 a year. So while the full-time faculty are $10,000 under the state average, the top administrators are $14,000 over the state average. And they'll always say, well, we don't have funds for things. Well, they certainly have funds for themselves. As I said before, right after we accepted the new contract, which ended up with a 4% pay from 2007, they turned around and gave themselves about a 19% pay increase secretly. And when the union found out about that and spoke out against it, then they attacked the union for speaking out against it and calling the union leader, saying that she'd done a disservice to the college, to her members, she was divisive, and she was just distorting the truth. So the union leader put forward, very well-written, clear complaint about them giving themselves a big fat pay increase, and then they turn around and accuse her of being divisive and basically not telling the truth. But did they respond to that? Nope. There was no response from the union after that came out. In fact, the chancellor put this letter saying these things on the school's website. So you go to the home page, and there was a link to this letter. Can you imagine someone exploring the colleges, looking for a new college, and they click that and they see this link of the chancellor complaining about how he's making, in this letter he's complaining how he's making about $100,000 less than the previous chancellor, and that the union leader is divisive and so on and so forth. And that's going to really encourage people to go to the college. So again, part of the another example of how the union doesn't involve the membership in making decisions. Last March, they got the Board of Supervisors of San Francisco to unanimously pass a resolution saying that democracy should be restored to City College, because we all favor democracy, and that by no later than July of 2014, the Board of Trustees should be fully restored and the special trustees should be removed. So that's the voice of the people of San Francisco, all the Board of Supervisors. The union orchestrated this, or the union leaders orchestrated this resolution. Come July, the Board of Governors of the state have a meeting to decide, partly the future of City College. The state chancellor said the special trustee should be there for another year. So he basically told the Board of Supervisors, take your resolution and shove it, because we're going to keep the special trustee in for another year. The union goes up there with a demand. What's their demand? Their demand is not immediately restore our Board of Trustees. The union demands, and a few of the leaders must have come up with this, come up with a process for restoring our Board of Trustees. So they get the city government to say, restore the Board of Trustees by July. They go up to this meeting and talk about the illegal actions of the ACCJC that gave rise to the special trustee. I mean, they're using the words illegal, yet they don't say for his removal. They say we want a process. Now, do they put a timeline? No. Did they define what they meant by the process? No. So we're still stuck with this special trustee. Now, they may not have prevailed in demanding the restoration, but you don't go up there and ask for something that you don't want. What? Well, at least he gets paid at least $1,000 a day. It's probably more than that. So this is the kind of thing. So this top-down measure that they make the leaders decide to demand themselves, and then it's a very weak demand. There's a lot of secretiveness. There's a lack of communications, as I already talked about with this issue with the Pelosi and Weingarten meeting. The focus is narrowly on the ACCJC. Even with this trial that's happening, and this is what they've been doing for a few months now, they call for fair accreditation. As I already said, that's not possible. You cannot get fair accreditation out of the ACCJC. I mean, if I put forward something, I say we should be demanding full accreditation, that this judge should rule that the school is fully accredited until the end of the cycle, which would be 2018. But I think they'll say that's crazy. You can't ask for something like that because legally he can't do it. Well, you still put forward what you want. You don't put forward what you don't want, which is to have the ACCJC reevaluate the college. So, again, a lot of this is also going on with the staff, and overall, there's just been a really lack of militancy on the union, and even going normal political approach, which would be more liberal. I mean, they're doing a community organizing campaign. They're doing a survey of organizations. And in their survey, they want them to answer the following question. How will you help City College? These are the choices. Enroll in a class. This is local organizations. You aren't asking them, they aren't asking them to join a picket line, to come to one of our rallies, to hammer the local politicians, to do something. This is what they have in their list of choices. Enroll in a class, sign a petition, volunteer to speak to groups in your community, pass out information at BART stations or farmers markets, invite someone from our speakers bureau. That's what they're asking of community organizations. How is that going to solve any of our problems? So.